Nick. Hey, Darren.
How's it going?
Wow, that was amazing.
So let me
That
just.
was astounding.
Thanks,
Congratulations.
man. Thanks, man. Means a lot.
Yeah. Wow, we really enjoyed it. Wendy and I were sitting, I've moved since, but Wendy and I were in the living room. I had this broadcast on our big flat screen TV.
Oh, right on.
And it sounded great, it looked great, and the performance was just...
Thank you so much, man. It means a lot. It was so much fun to play your piece. And I'm so glad I don't have to practice it for a little bit.
Never.
Yeah.
How's it going, Zoo?
Good. Hang on. We're going to go live soon in like 2 seconds.
Cool. What are we doing? Are we doing beer? No beer?
Oh, get your beer. It's morning for me. I can't do that. I have coffee.
All right, I'm going to grab a beer.
I'm going to get a seltzer. I'll be right back.
So while Nick and Darren are getting their beverages, welcome to the 7th Soloing2020 post-premiere conversation. That was an awesome set, Darren. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
And Nick, my God, what two fantastic pieces.
Thank you.
Yeah, before we get into them, just wanted to know how you both are doing. It's been a while since March, right? It's been like half a year now. We're just kind of in our homes and.
Well, I do a lot better having something like this to work on, I'll tell you that. So thanks a lot for providing that sort of guiding light for me to follow something in the darkness. We're doing okay. It's just, it's rough, but we, can move things forward.
Yeah. For those who don't know, my day job, I play with a military ensemble in DC. And so, this whole pandemic thing has been kind of weird because government will always react differently than, the civilian sector. And so for a while, I was concerned that we would still be out there working while the pandemic was hitting. Luckily, we were placed into quarantine, but now we're sort of working our way back in. So, that's happening, but this project was great to break the monotony. So thank you for that. And yeah, it's great. It was a pleasure to be a part of this.
Yeah. So, Nick, your pieces. It's just. Can we just start from the beginning? And because I wasn't in on we started this commission, and then the both of you started working on it. So I wasn't in on any of that, and I'm really curious. Like, how did you start? How did you touched on it a little bit, Darren. Like, how did you choose the instruments and you presented them? If you can both just talk about how you worked on this and how it all started.
Yeah.
Nick, do you want to start or?
Yeah. I mean, we can talk from opposite sides of the fence, because for me, writing a percussion piece it always starts with this sort of daunting range of possibilities. It's so easy for the mind to create something bigger and bigger and bigger, and like, oh, we could have this over here and over there, and like, how would this, and then it has a tendency to grow in one's imagination. And so thankfully, Darren sort of bottled me back pretty quickly by providing the parameters that shelter in place next to, in an apartment next to neighbors that have lives of their own, would suggest. And so he sent me a very terse list of possibilities of instruments, and I really welcomed it. It was great. It was like, thank you. Okay, I know what the parameters are. I'm going to just like, I'm going to focus in instead of like growing outwards, and just bring the laser in instead of, widening the aperture. And it was just a delightfully focusing, very welcome set of instructions.
Yeah, being a percussionist, hearing you describe your initial reaction to the commission, it's funny being a percussionist, especially one that plays solo music and chamber music, because hearing a composer talk about the possibilities fills me both with like excitement and joy, and also just horror at the sort of like setup and the actual like physical thing of it, and so one of the things I think percussionists have a hard time doing is every new piece that we learn, there's no set way to write for our instruments, and if there's different things that we're hitting, that's a different note head, whatever. So almost like every piece, you're having to learn this whole new set of notation. And so one of my projects over the quarantine was to one, take stock of everything that I own, and then kind of create this. I'm still working on this, so that's why you didn't get it, Nick. But I'm working on creating this like notation key, like for me, so that I can focus more on learning the music and not actually deciphering the language, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds like you've almost turned the commissioning process on its head. So instead of the composer telling you, this is what I'm writing for, these are your instruments, you've actually flipped it and said, well, these are my parameters. And also the fact that you're making this note, I've never heard of this actually, Darren, that you're actually creating this notation. Is that for composers in general, or are you just actually giving them a way to notate for certain instruments?
Yeah, so I actually stole the idea from Sam Solomon, who's he was like, there was like the original set of percussion soloists, and he's sort of like the second tier. He went to Juilliard. He teaches at Boston University right now. Beautiful player. But he has a book called Writing for Percussion, I think, and he talks about how he commissioned all these composers, and he was like incredibly protective of this one setup for the same reasons I said earlier. And at first I sort of had the same reaction of like, well, if I limit the sounds, is the music all going to sound the same? But in listening to his commissions, like, I think, setting kind of parameters just forces you to be a little more creative, personally. So I don't know. No one's complained too much yet. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
I would find it I would find it very welcome to just get a super clear notational guide. I reflect briefly on writing for drum set for a number of different ensembles, and almost every time they would come back and say, oh, could you please rewrite the drum set, where the snare is here and the kick is there, and then kind of in parentheses, standard style. And every person different, and each person was equally adamant that what they were listening was absolutely standard. It's like, okay. So,
most of us can't read music anyway, so.
Tell me what your universal standard is, that everyone knows. It's wonderful. So, power to you, man.
I love it.
We've run into that quite a bit. We've had, in the past few years, like three, four drummers, and they've all had their opinion on how drum set should be notated, kind of driving our composers a little bit crazy. But I wanted to ask you, Nick, how did you come up with these two movements, the subject matter, and all that?
Well, the first movement, I knew I wanted to write for the tabletop objects, because I thought that was really intriguing, and I think you even knocked me down from my expectations and clarified. It's like, yeah, of the 6 or of the 8, you can choose 3. That's how many fit on the table. It's like, okay, all right. Like I said, just like kept on getting tighter and tighter. So I listened to the samples that you sent, the audio samples that you sent, and so I resolved to do one movement. I wasn't sure if I was going to be doing two movements or if it was going to be one and maybe mixing the tabletop stuff with the vibe stuff. And as I got into the tabletop piece, um, it just spoke so clearly. It sort of carved out its own world in such a lucid way that I felt like, you know what, let me just drive this thing home. Let me stay inside the world that this has generated and like get everything I can out of it and get out of there just before, you know, just at the right moment, just sort of like in and out. And the rhythm, as I mentioned in the program notes, was inspired by a piece off the new Piron record. I was listening to it, and right after the second track of the record, I took off the headphones and I just started scrawling down rhythms, and that became sort of the main rhythmic paragraph of the piece, the thing that sort of repeats again and again, that sort of gets conjugated across the three different sounds. So and you really kind of, you know, you really maintained that intense drive of it. It was an amazing thing, not only to hear but to see.
That's why I work out, you know.
My old son Leo is a percussionist, and when he looked at the score and he was kind of picturing how he would play it, he's like, man, you got to really kind of think about left right sticking, you know, like where are these objects going to be, you know, like don't paint them in any corners where you can't like physically reach some object, you know, just geographically.
Is that
so
kind of the reason? Sorry, is that kind of the reason you limited him to 3 objects, Darren? Was that this a
Well,
limitation, or you didn't want to go too crazy on like geography placement?
Well, part of the reason, it might have just been like poor communication on my part. I thought he was going to write a piece for vibraphone and toys, and I don't have enough like stands, you know, implements to hold the toys, and so that was sort of my like reasoning.
Oh, it was a piece born of a
Sorry, Nick.
misunderstanding. Interesting.
I'm a public servant, you know. I'm saving up for another table, so.
It turned out the sticking wasn't the problem. That's what was so delightful. Like seeing it's miraculous. Like you sort of see these sort of problems. I sort of see these sort of geometrical kind of problems present themselves, and then like, oh, he got out of it. You know, how did he do that? You know, so it was really a visual and auditory delight. The second movement for vibes, that's the Corpus Callussum piece, and that's I've done a number of pieces like that where there are these instantaneous tempo changes, tempo modulations with polyrhythms where one of the lines will maintain a constant absolute pulse across the change. So as strange as the textures instantaneously seem to change, if you listen to one hand or the other hand, you'll hear a steady, sort of like a tag team. So this quintuplet turns into a septuplet at a different tempo, but you'll see his hand not changing, you know, in terms of absolute duration. And then the other hand is doing something else. It's free to, you know, it's broken into a completely different tempo. And now it is going to become the steady pulse for the next change. So it's just kind of this nice, tempo, kind of like left hand, right hand, left hand. And the independence, you know, the left-right independence that the piece demands, really feel for you, man. I can't believe you pulled that off. That's what inspired the name Corpus Callussum, because that's the bundle of fibers in our brain that connects the left and the right hemispheres. So it kind of invokes that independence.
Yeah, it kind of gives us that perspective, that bottom line perspective from which we can understand what's happening. It's like instead of, because there's so much polyrhythm going on, instead of it turning into this total chaos and just kind of immersing yourself in the chaos, there's this line that's controlling everything, and everything is kind of revolving around that, which is fascinating because you're part of the process in a way. You know, you're not out of the loop, you're in the loop. And yeah, I agree, Darren, that was an amazing feat you pulled off. I would have loved to hear it again, actually.
Gosh, don't say that. Don't say that, I'm done.
I won't hear it again, but that was really.
Let's know how you prepped it. Like what was the practice? Yeah, like how did you?
A lot of alcohol. No, that through line. So you know, being a percussionist, you know, a lot of our university training kind of, at least mine, I guess, revolved around polyrhythms. And so I was lucky enough to sort of be familiar with a lot of the things you're asking me to do. But what really helped me was that through line that you were talking about, that constant pulse. And that really helped me sort of lock it down. Cause yeah, if it was like, you know, there was this almighty non-stopping, you know, bigger beat, I definitely would have probably thrown the white flag. But yeah, that through line saved me. Thank you.
Well, ironically, it's also the one thing that without the through line, a first-time listener would not know if you were performing it right or wrong.
That's true.
Well, pretty much
true.
all of the modern music is like that, right? Like the new complexity. Carter.
Right.
That's why, and I mentioned like kind of just immersing yourself in the complexity and just understanding you're just swimming in all this stuff, right? Without really knowing where you are. But yeah. I wanted to mention your, Nick, you have so many different, I mean, you're such a versatile creator. So you not only compose, but you're a fantastic guitarist, and you do a lot like a lot more than many people I know in terms of style and exploration. You do a lot of improv, and one thing I noticed is that your improv is very different depending on the medium you're in. Like you have this different approach, and you have a really interesting approach to improv in a certain setting. So there's the metal stuff you do, but then there's this kind of not sure how to call it, but kind of like you describe it like a found object kind of improv, where sounds are not really structured in themselves, like in jazz, right? You have a certain language of improvisation that people understand. You can step in, and there's certain rules you need to abide by. But the found object improvisation is fascinating to me. Can you talk about that a little bit and how that works?
Yeah, I think I can refer to a couple of different groups. One is a guitar duo called Chord, Chord. It's a guitar duo I have with my friend Tom Marsan, and another improv, a couple of other improv groups. One is called Swim This, and another is called Zinc 9 Psychedelic. Swim This was with Michael Lytle and with Jerry Hemingway, and Zinc 9 Psychedelic is with Dave Ballou and Kevin Norton. And what you're saying is really true. I mean, really, if you heard each of these ensembles, you wouldn't really hear a lot of similarity. You're really in different worlds listening to the music, and of course you would expect that because of the different people that are involved. What I found really exciting about Chord is that Tom and I didn't really know what we were going to do together. We've been exploring guitars. We're both sort of guitar geeks, and back in 2008 he started to collect guitars, and then I would kind of find something that was inspired by something that he got, and then we'd look for, and we would just sort of, we'd get together with like the latest guitar that he borrowed or bought or whatever, and we'd sort of just play it and listen to it, and this went on and on and on. And sometimes we would just find ourselves just hitting a chord and just like listening to the way the sound evolves and sustains, and just really stripping genre out of it and discovering the sound of instrument. And so when he and I decided to do some playing together, um, I think that's what you mean by this sort of found music. Uh, we really didn't know what to expect. And we played for like 3.5 hours and we recorded it and spent a long time digesting it, listening to chunks of it, and it was teaching us what it was. So we were finding the language inside the recordings of the improv that we were doing. And what it evolved into was a very sort of ecstatic, trancy, deep listening, concentration, improvisation with that's also very, very saturated. It's aggressive and intense and immersive, but it's not something that you could have. We could have that we would have. They're not parameters we would have agreed on ahead of time. We had to find it, and I think that's the most beautiful thing about improvisation is that you do find what the music wants to be, and you follow it, you kind of serve it, and by keeping yourself open to it, you really become the servant of this thing that, if you just stay sensitive to it, will show you what it wants to be.
Yeah, it sounds like you've really gone deep in the idea of improvisation. Um, I actually hadn't thought about that side of improvisation, like even improvising how the sound comes to you. It's like allowing for the experience of finding or letting your instrument dictate what it wants from you. Kind of a real symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
And that's, it's I don't know if you have a switch in your brain that you can flip on and off, but it seems like there's the concert experience, the concert. I remember we talked about this last time we met. It's like I wasn't sure you were still writing music. I mean, like you wrote tonight, or like Amalia's Secret. Amalia's Secret is one of my all-time favorite written concert pieces, and it's on this record that I loved for years and years and years. And I finally was able to. It was the first piece. It was the piece on the first Naked Eye electric acoustic concert. So I programmed it as soon as I could. But even that, you have some improv sections in it, but I feel like they're improv sections in a written concert piece. So is that I mean, for you, is there like there's a difference, right, in the way you approach that kind of music and then in the way you approach, is it a mindset, is it what is it?
Well,
Happens?
yeah, I mean that the way I wrote Amalia is kind of grew out of the way that I write for Dr. Nerve, where I have composed material. It's usually very rhythmically based. There's a certain level of complexity and groove to it, and playfulness maybe, and interaction. And then what I really love to do is then unleash soloists so that you can, take a pattern and repeat it 8 times, or keep it open, or maybe just have it for 2 measures or something, but let someone express something spontaneous over it. And in the case of Dr. Nerve, I had the advantage of knowing what kind of a soloist, what kind of a free improviser Michael Lytle is, or Dave Douglas, or Yves Dubois, Don Davis. You sort of know who your players are. What was really fun about Amalia was that I was writing solos for people who I didn't know if they improvise, So I'm gonna let them.
Yeah. That was bang on a can, correct? At the time.
Yeah, right. And so and it was a wide range of Mark Stewart on guitar, course, you know, he improvises. Electric guitar tradition, you've been improvising, you know, since the very beginning. But I really wasn't sure what Maya Beiser's background in improv was, you know. So when she takes her solo on the very first movement, you know, I remember so clearly my first rehearsal with them. I was just like on the edge of my seat. It's like, what's she gonna do? What's she gonna do? You know, she killed it, of course, you know. And so everyone and your soloists are amazing. So I think everyone finds, it's something I would actually like to talk to your musicians about at some point, because I never really got a feeling, I didn't have the time after the show to just say, you know, how inside your wheelhouse is this? You know, if someone asked you to improvise for 16 bars over some weird fractured groove, is that something you can do all day, or is that something where you kind of like go, oh God, thank God that was over, you know? Did anyone notice that I don't usually improvise? So it could, you know, anywhere in that range, you know.
I think we have the whole gamut. We can drill down. I can tell you exactly who to, but
Okay.
I don't really have the whole gamut.
That's amazing. So, but there, you know, even you have a more predictable range of expectations when you work that way.
Sure.
Think Nine Psychedelic or Swim This or Chord, there really are no expectations. You know, you don't even know who's going to make the first sound, you know, and if you're listening carefully, everyone's, you know, every sound you make is going to have a consequence in either what you play next or what someone else is going to play next. So you just, it is very, you know, it is much more unpredictable, and it's not notated. So, of course.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention was because you code as well, right? You write your own computer programs. And the last piece you did, I don't know if it's the last one, but it's the last one I know of, for Kathy Supovi. You wrote this fun piece, and I forget the title, Nick. But basically, you have her, which is almost every pianist's nightmare, to sight read on stage. And so,
Zero waste. Zero waste.
Sorry?
The name of the piece is Zero Waste.
Zero waste. Right. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that a one-off thing? Is that something you're exploring?
I wish you were here. I wish you were here to talk about the nightmare. She, it was a piece that I wrote for a series at NYU. I'm an adjunct professor at NYU, and Kathy premiered it there. And I wanted to do a piece that was live interactive with some notational aspect of it, and I wanted to transform somehow what she performed on piano in a real-time notational environment. So I used AMSL, which is a computer music language that I co-designed with Phil Burke. It's able to read MIDI notes from a keyboard like a synclavier or a disclavier rather, or any MIDI keyboard. And it also has a notation package and a transcription package. So you can send it a bunch of MIDI notes over time, and it will do its best to notate it on a staff. So I was kind of thinking, it was kind of similar to Darren's commission. I was kind of thinking big at first and thinking like, oh, maybe she could, you know, improvise maybe 10 motives, and I could sort of create these hybrid motives from that and renotate them, and then she could perform them and sort of do this big piece where it's this hybrid of notation and improvisation and reading and stuff like that. And the more I thought about it, the more I wondered, like, wait a minute, there's some really basic questions I need to have answered here. Like, what's the experience going to be for her to perform something and read it and then renotate it? You know, what are the limits of the accuracy? What limits of the doability? And I just stripped it away and stripped it away and stripped it away and left a very simple core idea of having the software present 2 measures of music for her, which she has never seen before, have her sight read that, have the software transcribe her performance and present that as the next 2 measures of music, which she then has to sight read, which it then transcribes, which she then has to sight read. And it's like the game of telephone.
It's like the game of telephone. Yeah, things get distorted or get change a little bit.
So over 10 minutes, you see, and the audience sees, because it's projected, you see these 2 measures of music being sight read and mutated over time.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage.
Stresses me. I just hearing about it, man. Jesus.
It's a great idea because the piece is never the same, right? It's never the same each time.
It never starts the same. You know, the first 2 measures are algorithmically generated, and even if the first 2 measures were the same, it would be different every time, just because of the vagaries of performance. One of the things that so many things came out of the discussion. It was one of the things that we all do as musicians, that Kathy said, it's you do these expressive things as a reader, but then it gets notated. So you have this consequence of something where I fed something up. Well, now that's going to be notated as something that has been sped up, which makes me obliged to play it like that. So all these expressive nuances that she typically puts into her performance suddenly had notational consequences, which was really interesting. And there were there were these phenomenon that would happen, like things would kind of cluster, and that's because notes that were played too close together would be noted as a chord. Now, once it's a chord, it stays a chord, right? And any other note, it's like a magnet. You get these like cluster magnets.
Yeah.
So there are these clusters building up in the piece. But then I noticed that they were pulling apart as well. And I asked her about that afterwards. It's like, I understand how we got the clusters, but I don't understand how they fell apart. And she said, well, because she doesn't have a really wide range, a wide reach in her hands, the way she plays clusters is she breaks them up. So you got a whole big cluster go chung chung. Well, that becomes then notated, right? So the cluster starts to pull apart again. So it's this amazing dynamic process where it's like these 2 measures of this living creature, this kind of mold that's kind of pushing at you and pushing back.
Right. Yeah, so in one sense, Kathy is looking at the notation and making her interpretation, and then the computer is generating its own interpretation and distorting it that way, and on and on and on. Yeah.
Right. Well, the computer's doing its best to notate. It's doing its best faith interpretation of her performance.
Right.
And there's nothing, unbiased about that. I mean, if you really wanted to have a completely accurate transcription, you would notate everything in 256th notes, right? With 7 rests of 256th rests, and then and that would be right. I mean, it would be right, or make them 512 notes, like whatever. Just like it'll be a perfect transcription, but it's not going to be readable. It's going to be insane. So the definition of the problem itself has bias built into it on both sides, on the side of the person reading it and on the side of the software that has to produce something that is readable.
Sure. Are you going to write another piece? I mean, like another computer piece, not similar, but I mean, sort of. Is that in the works?
Interactive computer piece? Yeah, I have a number of them. I don't do a lot of performance with computer these days. I've been focused more on live performance with guitar, and when I compose, that's sort of when I tend to use software the most, like the vibes movement which was algorithmically generated at the get-go, and then I kind of molded it and shaped it. So I very much like to use software in the composition phase of the creative process. I don't do it that much live. I think Zinc 9 Psychedelic is a good example of a band where I started to use, I had like tabletop guitar and computer. And Dave Ballou had his computer and his trumpet, and we were all very sort of electronic-y and computery and noisy, and it was fun. But I remember I think Dave, like, his computer broke or he forgot it in the car or something like that. And he had so much more fun playing without the computer that, like, I left my computer in the car the next time. You know, it's like, no, I've got plenty to say on my guitar with my pedals. It's like having a mouse and messing with it at the same time. It just, in that context, it didn't enrich me the way I would have wanted it to. But there are solo computer pieces where I just love digging inside the software and guiding a process interactively. But then that's really disconnected from playing and really, you know, interacting with a software system and thinking abstractly about how to guide it and follow it. And I'm totally get into that. I don't like these. I discovered that I don't really like the hybrid model very much.
Yeah, it also adds a layer of complexity live that you may not, you know, necessarily want.
Yeah. Probably the most successful guitar plus computer piece is called Density Trajectory Study, and there's actually a YouTube of it, which uses a computer to both as kind of a real-time interactive score, telling me when to play and when not to play, and it also takes an audio stream from what I'm doing and creates 3 virtual accompaniments. And I've performed that a number of times, and that really feels good because I don't really have to interact with the computer at all, other than to read it as a score. And it's a very rudimentary. It's just like play, don't play. You know, it's simple, 2 instructions. And so I get to improvise. I have enough of my mind free that I can improvise without thinking about the next time I'm going to be interrupted by a score. And the score is not so demanding that I'm sort of reading that and then using maybe 10% of my mind to improvise something that just sort of works. You know, I really feel fully committed to the improv, and that feels very liberating.
We're getting to the end of this. Darren, I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more about your program, but maybe at some other time. We're going to get booted from the session. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of you, Darren. A fantastic set.